Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how anyone can paint this easy, realistic watercolor sleeping fox in Procreate. I will show you and explain each step to give you my favorite techniques to create this adorable little fox. Whether you're a beginner or an advanced artist, these tips will help you take your work to the next level. You can find the exact brushes and canvases in the description below. This sketch and the color palettes will be available for free, and I'm currently using the rough texture canvas. So to begin, we're going to create a new layer on top of the sketch that we have underneath the watercolor texture canvas. And we're going to pick the wet on dry brush to start off, and keeping the opacity to around 75% and the size to around 100%. To begin, we're going to start with a light tone color of brown, and you can use the exact colors that I have provided here. So we're going to start with painting the inside of the ear, the face of the cheek of the fox, and as well as the tail and the back. And we're going to progress to the midtones and the dark tones from there. So let's get started here. And anytime I'm working with a sketch, it's a lot easier for you to follow along. But the sketch is not necessary, but it does help. And then we're going to move on with the cheek and the face of the fox. If you need to reduce the size to be a bit more precise, you can. I recommend for people to have a single fluid motion mimicking the traditional media like ink or watercolor without adding unnecessary layers or complexity to the artwork. And having a continuous stroke creates a smoother line and avoiding lifting the pencil when you have the pencil on the canvas. But if you are having difficulties, you can have multiple layers, but you just have to use the moving blender to blend them out. So the tip of the tail is going to be a bit brighter than the rest of the body. And foxes have rich, warm tone colors with their fur, ranging from deep oranges to soft whites and dark browns, which is great for beginners to begin painting. And don't forget the back of the fox as well. And now we're finished with the light tone colors. Now we're going to create a new layer. And now increase the pigment to a bit mid-tone, darker tone color than we had before. Maintaining the same opacity and the size. Now we're going to do the mid-tone colors outside of the ears, the face, and the body. The wet on dry brush is a great brush to start off the painting because of their brush sensitivity and their pinpoint accuracy. The hard edge gives a natural look of watercolor at the same time. Really easy to blend with other colors as well. And we're going to fill up the inside of the leg and the tail as well. And one of the reasons why I work with multiple layers with each color tone, and it's because you have a lot more control. You can always go back, take out that layer, and change the color if you don't like the color that you used. Or you can experiment and change the color by clipping the mask. And now we're going to start with a dark tone color. So create a new layer, go with the dark tone color that we have here. And now we're going to focus on the areas where there'll be a lot less light and it'll be bringing a lot of darkness into the area here. So the inside of the ear just like this. And on top of the hat. And of course, underneath the arm of the chin where the fox is sleeping on. Don't forget the legs and the tail where it's a lot more darker shading area here as well. If you are enjoying these tutorials, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. And now we're going to paint the hat of the fox. And I chose the blue color because I really like the tone blue as it is calming. So we're going to create a new layer and pick a bluish tone color here. And continue using the wet on dry brush. So we'll start with reducing the opacity to around 65%. We'll work from the bottom and then we'll move to the top. Just like this, fill in the area at the bottom here as well. To be more accurate with these sketches, just follow along the lines of the outside and then fill on the inside by putting a lot more pressure. But when you're outside being precise, you can reduce the pressure and be a bit more accurate on the outlines. And here's a quick tip for beginners. If you are working with multiple layers, make it a habit to make sure before you paint on anything to look at the canvas and which layer you are on. It's very frustrating when you're about to complete the painting and you forgot to make multiple layers. So if you made a mistake, you can't really go back or change the painting. Now we're going to create a new layer and put some mid-tone colors of the hat. And I just tested out. This is the color that I like to choose. So I like to give a three-dimensional look of the hat. So I'm going to put more mid shades, dark shades on the sides to give that 3D effect. So like this, I'm going to focus on the corners here. And a little bit of mid-tone colors on the ball of the hat as well. And now we're going to create a new layer and put the dark tone color now of the hat. And increasing the opacity to around 80%. And now just focusing on the edges to give that nice 3D effect of the shading area. And now once all the midtones, dark tones, and the light tones have been completed, we're going to start blending now. But to begin blending, we're going to open the Layers tab and use our two fingers to pinch the layers that we want to combine. I like to keep the hat and the body separate so we don't begin smudging. And use the moving blender now and increase the opacity to 100% and reduce the size to around 45%. And what we're going to do is now we're going to mix two-tone colors at a time by moving it around slightly in the wiggling motion. And just like that, we're now beginning to blend. For smaller areas, we can reduce the size of the brush, and as well as we can move in closer to have a more accurate color blending process. And just like this, I'm just slightly wiggling it around to give a nice blending texture look, as well as the ears. And now we're going to move on with the hat and pick that layer that we want and use the moving blender and make sure the opacity is at 100% before we start blending. And now we're going to begin mixing the two tone colors. And don't forget the little ball area as well. And now begin blending the dark tone and the mid-tone colors. Working with two-tone colors when you're blending gives a nice clean effect without over smudging, which is great for smaller areas like this. Now we're going to move on with adding some small details using the fine line brush. Now we're going to go to the Layers tab and actually reduce the sketch a little bit to see where we're focusing on when we're putting some fine line details. So I'm going to reduce the opacity to around 35%. So we'll start with the face of the fox area and then we'll move on to the body. So we're going to create a new layer. And we're going to use a black tone color to fill the eyes and the nose at this time. And the tip of the ear as well. Pick the fine line brush, keeping the opacity to 100%, and we're going to reduce the size to around 40%. And now we're going to add some darkness to the tip of the ears, just like this. And the eyes as well. I like to give some small eyelashes. And then the nose here. And I like to leave a small area on the corner of the light shining a little bit. And for the cheeks, I like to give a small little pinch of pink. And I want to reduce the opacity to around 50% to fill in the areas just like this. And I want to add some darkness to the hat as well to give that nice depth look of the hat protruding outwards on the bottom part here. In the corners as well is going to be a little bit darker here. And I'm going to add some white colored stripes across the hat to give it a bit more texture. So pick a white tone color and we're going to add some lines across here using the fine line brush that we had before. Just like this. We're going to have the opacity to around 80% here as well. Just creating some lines, just like this. And then adding some lines across, just like that. You can make it a little bit thicker than the ones at the bottom. It's personal preference. You can do circles, different designs. It's up to you guys. Now we're going to start using the fine line brush to work around the body of the fox. So we're going to continue working on that layer that we were working on before on the fine line brush. And we're going to reduce the opacity to around 13 to 15% and using the dark tone color that we use for the fox body. So we're going to make some areas a bit more sharper to give a bit more crisp edges. We're going to focus on making a little bit more darker pigment around the corners. And of course, the inside of the fox is going to be a little bit darker. So now pick a dark tone color that we used before and continue using the fine line brush and increasing the opacity to around 54% and the size to around 30 to 40%. And these lines in the insides are going to be a little bit more darker, so we're going to focus on that area of the inside of the fox, as well as the bottom of the chin area as well, just like this. And then this technique is great because we will move the pigments using the regular blender to the lighter tone area to give that natural look of watercolor paint being dropped from the dark to the light. As you can see, focusing on the inside, as well as the leg part and the tail. And don't forget at the bottom of the hat as well, which can be a little bit darker. And sometimes this can happen where you sometimes go back too much and you can erase part of the fox. For example, this area was the cheek that I accidentally erased. So we're going to bring it back, working in the same layer and filling the areas where you had missed out before. And this is the beauty of digital art. You can really have control of what you can put on, which layer you can put on, as well as fixing areas or going back in time. Now we're going to use the regular blender and begin blending. Now, continue working on the layer that we were using with the fine line brush and pick the regular blender. And we are going to reduce the size to around 35%. And we'll start with the ears, dragging some of that pigment downwards, kind of mixing in. And we can reduce the size here just a bit. around 10%, just dragging the colors down or up from the dark to the light, just like this, as well as the hat. Just pulling it down, and you can always push back up if it's too much pigment coming down. And now move on to the body. Increasing the size because it's a fairly big area, dragging the color down just like this, from the dark to light. Now moving upwards again, and a little bit inwards, and then upwards again, where the leg and the tail are. I'm going to move on and create some watercolor texture stain look. So we're going to create a new layer and use the wet on dry brush again, and pick a dark tone color that we used before, reducing the opacity to around 30 to 40% and size to 100% here. And to achieve this watercolor stain look, we're going to focus on areas where there was supposed to be some dark pigments, and we're adding some watercolor texture. Stain look. This will have a bit more transparent center, but hard edges on the corners. And as you can see, I'm working with the inside of the leg as well as the tail, because that's where it's fairly dark colors as well. And using different motions to be a bit more unpredictable is the best way to achieve this watercolor texture of stain look. And you can even go even darker in the areas where it's a bit more cornered in, with more shadows and darkness as well. I like to add some watercolor stain looks on the light tones of the face, tail, and the inside of the ear as well. So we're going to start with using the light tone color that we used before, but a bit more darker now, and reduce the opacity to around 50% and drop the size to around 35%. And we're going to zoom in and focus on the areas of the inside of the face here, closest to the fur where it's a bit more darker, as well as the bottom of the mouth, as well as the corners of the face to give that three-dimensional look. Same thing with the inside of the ears. It's going to be a bit more darker, creating that watercolor stain look. And you could always increase the opacity to make it a little bit darker, just like this. And don't forget the tail of the fox, where it's going to be a bit brighter, but we're going to add some textures to give that nice look that it has a bit of shadows due to the fur. Now we can remove the sketch entirely by checking off the box that was on the layer of the sketch. Now to finish off this painting, we're going to add a bit of shadow underneath the fox. So we're going to pick a dark blue tone color and create a new layer, but make sure it's the most bottom layer that we can make, and use the wet on dry brush, and keeping the opacity to around 25% and increasing the size to 100%. And we're just going to focus on the bottom left, bottom corners, and on the right as well, just like this. We can also use the moving blender to blend out some of the shadows to increase the size to around 40% and opacity at 100%, and just slightly blending, putting a small amount of pressures around the corners, just like this. And there you have it, adorable little sleeping fox. And if you enjoyed this quick tutorial, there are a lot more videos on my page, and you can continue painting with me by clicking on the next video. See you there.